Dear students, good evening. Welcome to Excellence IAS. Let us do the analysis for 5th November 2022 and 7th November 2022. The first article, Uniform Civil Code. What is the definition of this? Today, personal affairs of different religions are governed by different personal laws. For simple example, Muslims are governed by Sharia Act of 1937. In this context, replacing all the personal laws with one uniform law, we call that as Uniform Civil Code. Today, Gujarat, Uttarakhand, all these are talking about implementing the Uniform Civil Code. And Article 44 of the Constitution also clearly stated that it shall be the responsibility of the state to strive for the Uniform Civil Code in India. Already, Hindu Code Bill has codified the aspects related to Hindu religion. Because of the opposition from conservative Hindus, it was broken into 4 different laws and passed by the parliament. Now, what is the context for Uniform Civil Code today? Let us understand it this way. The law implementation, judgments by the court, these have become too complex in India. And second, uniformity is one way to bring in unity. This is what is the ideological support towards the Uniform Civil Code. And the third most important thing is gender equality is missing across the religions, and also various kinds of practices existing across the religions were derogatory to human life. So we need to correct the religious practices in line with constitutional values. In this case, what are the negatives or challenges which we are seeing? India is a too diverse country, and being so diverse, uniform civil code may not be possible. Today, we have, in the case of civil laws, criminal laws, some uniformity exists. But if you see carefully, many of the amendments were made to this by the states. The uniformity has given out for different laws across the states. But though it is at the periphery, but still the uniformity cannot be upheld in a diverse country such as India. And third most important thing is, remember that Muslims, they are believed to be guided by the personal law. The personal law which has come into existence through Sharia Act passed in 1937. But if you go to Jammu and Kashmir, the Sharia Act is not in force. If you go to Goa, the personal laws are not in force. So this clearly shows that the customary laws are still being practiced across the tribal belt, and also personal laws which are supposed to guide a religion are not guiding them. So in this scenario, what it can be simply stated is uniform civil code is necessary. But when it has to be brought in, as our constitutional forefathers said, that it has to be brought in a gradual approach. Let us try to understand this gradual approach. Law Commission has clearly stated that the prejudices, stereotypes, discriminatory practices which are existing in every religion has to be reformed first, so that every religion reaches to certain standard with regard to constitutional values. Then we can move towards the Uniform Civil Code. That is the best approach towards going through it. That is the point you need to remember here. An electoral pivot that restores Brazil's democracy. Now, in this article, what I found very interesting is populist welfarism and developmental welfarism. So, welfarism, I have divided them as populist and then developmental. So, Bolsonaro, the previous president of the Brazil, is an example for populist and welfaristic, and Lula da Silva is a developmental welfarist. Let us try to understand the differences. So here, benefits are seen as patrimonialism. It means the leader tries to connect the benefits and the beneficiaries to himself. In India also, if you see among the chief ministers and prime minister, that everywhere his name or position comes into picture. So a direct connect the leader tries to make between the benefits, beneficiaries and himself. In a developmental welfarism, the benefits are seen as capacity building exercise. It means education or health. For that matter, any benefit which has been given is considered as a right. So the rights-based approach is an important aspect of the developmental welfarism. And the next is, in the case of developmental welfareism, we are seeing the welfare as a basic right. And in a populist welfareism is to create a dependency on the government. More or less, people are looking towards the leader for the various welfare benefits. This is divisive. It is offered to the people who are loyal to the leader rather than those who are eligible. Here, developmental welfareism is inclusive. What is required today in India is a developmental welfareism which is meant to create the capacities, which considers the people as the rights holders, and which is progressive and which is also inclusive. So, we have to replace the populist welfareism with the developmental welfareism. And then, today every democracy is more or less seeing certain signs of authoritarianism. What are those signs of authoritarianism a society has to be careful about? One is bureaucracy, which is supposed to deliver the benefits to the people. If it is getting politicized and its neutrality is shaking and it is partial towards only certain sections of the people, then that kind of bureaucracy which is being created and which is working with the support of force, either military or police, that is a sign of authoritarianism. And second is the increasing role of military in day-to-day life. It means something has to be delivered to the people. If we are more depending on authority or force, that is definitely the gap between the people and the government is increasing. Next is, rather than talking what the government is doing, if we are trying to create propaganda, disinformation, then the trust of the government on the people is decreasing. And second is divisive politics that are being played upon, and one group is promoted against the other group through hate speeches and court packing. They understand this point of court packing. In highest courts in the country, constitutional courts, etc., if they are filled with the judges like S-men who says yes to everything the government says, that is the important symbol of loss for the democracy. So the court packing we call it as. And finally, the government's depending on few people and giving all the resources and common goods, public benefits to those people, that is what is dangerous. This is what we call it as crony capitalism. So politicization of bureaucracy and dealing the matters in the society through the use of force of the state, disinformation, divisive politics, hate speech, court packing, or creating loyal judges in judiciary, and then business politics nexus that is leading to crony capitalism, increased corruption. All these shows the authoritarian tendencies in a given democracy, and every country shall be cautious about that. These 2 points can be effectively used in your governance chapter. Architecture, the profession needs strengthening. Whenever we are trying to answer points, we talk about standard operating procedures, professionalization of public services. These are the words we regularly use. Then what is meant by a profession? Profession means you have to have specific knowledge of certain practices in the conduct of that particular activity. Let's take a doctor shall have a knowledge of certain protocols which are being developed through the application and understanding of science. And so, a profession is nothing but a standard set of practices that are expected to be followed in the conduct of that profession. In this case, a professional shall have the special knowledge in that particular profession. Indian Administrative Service, IAS officer is a professional in governance. So professionalization means for every service we need to set a practice guidelines and everyone has to follow that who are practicing that profession. Next, remote voting. NRI voting we also call it as. This is in the news recently. The short-term overseas migrants should be given a right to vote. How they shall be given? 2 proposals have come. One is electronically passed postal ballot, and second, proxy voting. So in the proxy voting, one person votes on the behalf of the other person, and here the postal ballots can be used. So the postal ballots will be more effective. Then many of the people, will be living for long term in the United States or in the other countries. Shall we give voting rights to them? And then what is short term, what is long term? These issues have to be settled further. Next, the real issue at COP27 is energy equity. Let us try to understand this. What is energy equity? What is equity? It means that let us take two people at the different levels of development. If you are sharing the things equally between them, it is not good. The person who has less, he has to get more. Who has more, he has to get less, so that both of them reaches to the level of equality. So equity is a step towards equality, where the poor and marginalized, underdeveloped, they have to be given more benefits compared to well-off. In the case of the climate change, the equity has to guide us. How this equity principle has been set up? Through common but differentiated responsibilities. It means that we have collective goals, but the people who are responsible for more carbon accumulation in air, they have to take more responsibility. So let us see certain aspects towards it. Top 20 developed countries and bottom 20 countries, if you take, the per capita carbon emissions are 85 times more in the developed countries. That is because of their lifestyle. We have seen a mission that is called Life for Environment mission proposed by Narendra Modi, which is talking about changing the lifestyle. And second is, today there is a concept called carbon budget. We want to limit the total amount of the carbon released into the atmosphere shall not be more than heating the earth by 1.5 degrees C. Remember, the total amount of carbon which we are going to release shall not heat the earth by to 1.5 degrees Celsius. That is the available space, the carbon space which we have. In this carbon space, 4/5 is already released. It means it was exhausted. The remaining space is 1/5. How this 1/5 has to be distributed across the countries? The people who have polluted this globe, they have to get the less space. And the people who are having developmental needs, they have to get the more space from this carbon budget. That's what we call it as consensus of equity has to guide the climate change discussions. The developed countries are not interested in this. Second is, we are not responsible for historical emissions, and also the India as a country may be giving more emissions, but if you say per capita emissions per individual, if they are calculated, India has very less emissions. In this scenario, if equity is the guiding principle, the more has to be given to the people at the bottom. So equity on what basis it has to be guided? On per capita emissions. That is the point we need to create. So remember, the carbon budget available is very limited. In that space, India has to get more share because it has many goals to be achieved, development goals to be achieved. The second point is India is not responsible for historical emissions. Third is per capita emissions have to guide climate change talks and energy equity has to guide rather than energy equality. These are the points we need to keep in mind. These are the articles. Thank you very much.